everybody, and welcome back to the Expanding Your Horizon podcast. I'm Rob Stoner, owner and president of Horizon Managed Services. With me today is Joe Malinosky, our service delivery manager. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how zero trust can help businesses build a more secure future. So, without further ado, we'll jump right in. So, what is zero trust? Zero trust is a cybersecurity framework that requires every user, every device to be authenticated and authorized before they can access any resources on the network.
Yeah, basically, you assume that a breach has already occurred or that it is going to occur with like 100% certainty, and then you approach your security from that perspective. That users shouldn't be granted access to sensitive information by like a single verification, that it should happen over and over, and that your security doesn't just like stop at the firewall, it stops at the user's fingertips, wherever it is that they might be working.
And I think we all had to make a big shift the last couple of years. A lot of small businesses did of moving past the firewall, moving past what we term as the perimeter to with COVID. Employees had to go immediately work from home or work from cafes or work from wherever. The concept of everybody going in the office Monday through Friday and sitting desk to desk, that got thrown out the window if the business wanted to stay operating. And so we had to step back and go, how can we secure our client environments when they're not all sitting in the physical same location or same locations? I, I would kind of liken the old approach, the firewall, the perimeter approach, is like a castle with walls and a moat around it where everyone lives inside of it, and those walls and that moat uh, help ensure that you're safe and secure inside that castle wall. And zero trust is saying, well, not everyone can live in those walls. So we're going to give you some armor so that when you're out and about, when an arrow comes at you, you're protected, you're safe, and you're secure. So a little bit of
Exactly.
a little bit of background on zero trust, and conceptually it kind of was created back in 2010 2011 in some research papers originally penned by Forrester, proposing moving away from like the castle walls, the perimeter approach, and shifting to more of this individual armor, moving past the boundaries of the traditional edge. It's a never trust, always verify. And so you're kind of like Joe, you said earlier, we're assuming that the device that the user is working from is breached or is insecure. And so we need to verify every time it requests access to something. Uh,
Right, and not leaving and making sure that we don't repeatedly use the same login. Like when I come in the morning, I log into whatever my SaaS application is. That I lock my computer at the end of the day. I come back in the morning, then I'm still not logged in, and that's one of those principles of zero trust, is that you have to re-authenticate and make sure that after a period of time, it makes sure you are who you say you are.
yep, exactly. It's not just trusting that one time; it's verifying throughout the day, throughout the process when you're accessing different things. What are some of the Joe? When we talk about principles of zero trust, what would you say one of the key principles is? Is it like multi-factor authentication? Is it particular technology? Is it like the concept of least privilege or something else?
Yeah, both of those are they're key. They're key to getting a zero trust architecture in place. Particularly the MFA and the least privilege, they help mitigate a couple of those common issues that we see. Phishing being like really common. I think most of us are familiar with that, where you get those emails where they're like, "Hey, your Facebook account, your Amazon account has been compromised. So why don't you tell us what your credentials and passwords and stuff are, and we'll help you out with that." So it's going to help mitigate that, where if someone does get your password and your username, there's that extra step that they can make sure you are who you say you are. And so that could also be biometric in nature. Fingerprints, the retinal scans, I think, is probably a thing now. But yeah, it's increasingly common on our devices. The fingerprint readers, so the iPhones have had them forever. The Samsung devices have them. So that's just another form of multi-factor. Um, and kind of the mindset of that the breach will happen with 100% certainty, or that you've already been breached. The least privilege comes into play by making sure that, like, okay, if this is the case, if you've been compromised, the damage that could be done is minimal as possible, because you could only do the things you need to do, not the things that you may necessarily want to do, but the things that you need to do, and you can only access the things that you're supposed to with the least amount of, you could read the document, you can't modify the document if that's what your role would entail. And it kind of, there's also credential stuffing, which you see the breaches like the Equifax and Target and SolarWinds or whatever, where they grab user accounts and passwords and they're sitting in the dark web in some gigantic database that the bad actors, they go out and they buy those databases and they use it to try to attack people, and they're just firing these usernames and passwords out. So again, it's the same thing. If that's successful, the least privilege offers you that degree of protection, and the multi-factor helps mitigate the possibility that they're going to get in and do damage.
One thing that I find having lots of conversations with clients and prospects on is a concept that you briefly touched on. It's that it's not a like a breach is a certainty. It's not that you hope you don't get breached. In today's world, it's effectively guaranteed that at some point you will suffer some type of a breach through technology, and that it's not avoiding the breach so much as having the safeguards and the controls in place to minimize the impact from the breach, to reduce the footprint, reduce the what the bad actor can get access to, and kind of minimize that damage that they can take on. And I just want to make sure it's clear that, like, gone are the days, from our perspective anyways, where you can eliminate the concept or the idea of a breach entirely from a business, small or large, and it's now you have to assume that you're going to get breached at some point, and it's just how prepared are you for when that certainty happens.
Yeah, I think it's not even worth having the mindset of the old school where, hey, I'm going to set it up and people can come in. It used to be about the ease of access, right? And working quick and working efficient and all of that. And that's when you had the business that was kind of here, and then you had the computer IT bit that was bolted on. Now it's like it's one big thing, and it becomes about protecting the business and protecting your assets, protecting your bottom line, protecting your reputation. So now it's a different animal, and I think just getting away from the whole I want to make it easy for my people. It's like, no, those days are gone. I have to make it safe for my business.
Yeah, it's very true. Those, like you said, those days are gone. Uh, Looking towards some of the positives of zero trust, when we think of benefits, like when I think of it as like just an overall improving your security posture, because you're taking that assumed untrusted approach and you're requiring verification, a reduction in the risk of data breaches, not that you're reducing the likelihood of them, but that you're going to reduce the impact felt from them because users are only going to have access to a subset of the data that they need access to fulfill their role. Um, and mitigation of like insider threats is another thing where it's looking at your own employees and saying, yes, I've got a great team, and I trust them implicitly, uh, but we still need to ensure that if for some reason an employee decides to go rogue, how do we minimize the damage from an internal threat actor? And again, that again comes to reducing the amount of data access that they have. But what would you say, from your perspective and what you see, are some of the key benefits from implementing zero trust in the small medium business?
Well, I think you touched on some of them. I've had some experience with the inside actors. People walking out with client lists. The sales guy left and decided on his last day to reach out to the reporting person and say, "Hey, I need a list of all my clients," and there wasn't a lot of questioning, and he walks out with it. right? So one of the things that zero trust, one of the things that you do to implement that is to you want to promote continuous logging and monitoring of the activity on that happens on the network, that happens on the computers and the mobile devices, and that happens beyond the perimeter of the network. They work from home, they working vacations. They go to Costa Rica for a week to enjoy some sun and surf, and they're on their mobile device. Well, that mobile device has a connection to the corporate network. It's got corporate data on it, and you kind of, from IT, from a business perspective, you need to understand what's going on those devices.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's also some areas that maybe the small business doesn't typically think of, but in the case of like let's say a healthcare provider, uh, beyond just the improved posture that they have, healthcare, maybe finance, or like local government agencies, they all have different regulatory compliance requirements that they need to meet. Like in the case of healthcare, it's HIPAA. In the case of any kind of any company doing finance or even processing payments, there are things like PCI DSS, Sarbanes Oxley, and others, depending on what they're doing, that they need to comply with. And then moving on to like the local governmental agency, like just because you're a small government for like a town or a village doesn't mean you're not a threat vector. And even if you like, we've had this conversation not with governments per se, but with small businesses where they say I'm too small to be a target. And I remember distinctly, I was at a conference I think a year or two ago where the security researcher was giving an overview of a case that he had actively worked, where a small business had been compromised, but they weren't the target. That small business was a vendor or a supplier, a vendor to a governmental contractor providing services to a much larger governmental agency. And so the threat actor targeted the small business, knowing that they would then be able to have a likely lower threshold, lower barrier to enter, compromise their invoicing system, sent a compromised invoice with a malicious link that so when the government agency paid it, they also downloaded malware, and then they were breached, and that threat actor was able to get to their ultimate target, with the small business being just the stepping stone. And what we're starting to see is a lot more regulation coming down the pipe right now, typically not required by law or by insurance companies, but it's starting to be enforced with cybersecurity policies getting renewed this year, and we're hearing rumblings of it coming down from the government through CISA, that even the small business is going to be required to meet certain security minimums because of just the burden and the threat, and the risk that they pose to society, to different businesses. So is there anything that you can speak to on that front?
Yeah, that jogged a couple thoughts for me. One of them, when you talk about the small business, I think when we hear these stories about cybersecurity issues and attacks and all that, like the ones that make it onto the news are, the Target and the Equifax and all that, the big companies. So if Target gets hit, other retailers, they're going to note that and they're going to up their game. So you have the people in the news and the big players, they get hit, and then all of that rises. They get better at their cybersecurity principles. But what falls off the radar are the smaller businesses become kind of more vulnerable because no one's talking about them. So small businesses aren't as apt to react when they see, oh, Target got hit. Well, I'm five people, 10 people, 50 people, whatever the case might be. And you think, no one's ever going to want to hit me. But when that small business serves a larger business, well, okay, now there's something here. You're just an avenue sometimes to the bigger guys, and that kind of necessitates all of us have to step up and get better at cybersecurity. And you kind of talked about the government bit, and like, yeah, it's almost saying it's a patriotic duty might be a little far fetched. That might be a little bit extreme, but what you have in your business or what you have in your home is a small network, right? And those networks connect to the internet, and the internet is a network. So like you hit Comcast or you hit Spectrum. So okay, now you're on their network. And those networks are part of our national network. And so networking is like it's like a B tree, and you just kind of keep going up and up and up until you're just kind of talking about the network at a national level. And when we start thinking about cybersecurity from a business standpoint, we also have to think, well, the government deals with that too from a national security standpoint. And like to a certain degree, all of us just become a launching point with the day and times that we live in, what goes on in China, what goes on in North Korea, what goes on in Russia, that we're just essentially like they get into our home network, to our small business network, and maybe they're not trying to ransom money from us, but they're using our computers to launch attacks to critical infrastructure within the company. So there's like a pretty easy to derive civic duty from making sure that your computer resources are secure.
Absolutely. That's something I hadn't even considered is the risk to to national resources or just from the typical small business, but it's absolutely there. It's absolutely there. Shifting gears a little bit, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. I mean, the goal of this podcast and the show is to be talking about two business owners about technical concepts in not very deep technical means, but at a high level, if you could just bullet point a list of what your typical implementation overview might look like for a zero trust deployment, uh, would you be able to just throw out kind of a high level order of that?
Yeah, you know, and it doesn't even necessarily start in a technical vein. I mean, it's about developing a plan. I mean, anytime you want to accomplish a goal, you should have a plan. And cybersecurity and zero trust is no different. So to develop a plan, you know, you want to gain an understanding of your IT environment and your processes and what your security posture is. And it, a risk assessment is core to that. And once you develop that risk assessment, now you have identified where it is that you need to improve. And um, in order to know, you know, to kind of put where you are into some type of scope, is you need to know where you're going and you need to understand what your desired outcome is. And I think human nature is to really always want like the biggest and the best, and I think that sometimes could be daunting and overwhelming, and it's always good to set attainable goals. So you assess your risk, you understand where you are, and set an attainable goal. It doesn't have to be everything all at once. Get incrementally better. um, you know, when it comes to identifying that or creating that risk assessment, the first thing you want to do, or maybe not the first, but one of the first, is to identify what your high value assets are. You know, the things that's really critical to you. Like I told you the story about the dude who walks out the door to another job with your client list. I would put that into my list of critical assets. It's important. It's valuable to my company, the people that I do business with. I do not want that walking out the door. Um, so that's just one example, but you know, your information systems, your accounting systems, you know, we talked about healthcare briefly, you know, personal identifying information that's becoming increasingly valuable to the bad guys. Um, so once you kind of have some of that in place, you know, develop your comprehensive risk plan, that's going to minimize exposure of these assets, keeping them safe. And then making sure that part of that is we talked about it a little bit earlier, least privilege access and multi-factor. You know, that's kind of where we start getting into the technological bit after you understand like your business and what's important to you and what has value, and monitoring and assessing this stuff continuously. Uh, Big companies can have automation and AI and all of that stuff, and that's great. And that might be that's the pinnacle, but that isn't where you're going to start. So just you know, think of it as you know. how and when do you audit? You know, if you don't have the capability to have big information systems like that, it's about auditing. And you kind of rinse and repeat this process. And like anything else, the more you do it, the more you're going to understand and you're going to be able to do it better the next time you reevaluate.
Absolutely. So as we get to the end of this episode, I just want to list off a couple things that you, the business owner or executive in the small business, can kind of take back to your team, or your IT provider, your internal IT person, from a tools and technology standpoint, of some things to look into and find out: are you using these, or are like these tools or these concepts? And if not, look into how and what type of tool you might want to get, and how you would implement that and how you would leverage that to better provide security. So, like, first and foremost on my list would be identity and access management. So, making sure that you've got control of the user accounts, that it's not just like local user accounts that anyone on the network can create on any system, but that there's a central management for that. And then, kind of going hand in hand with that, is making sure that you're leveraging multi-factor authentication. I think it's pretty common these days that we all do mobile banking. You get that you have to do multi-factor. We're using a lot of text messaging multi-factor, which is arguably not a good version of multi-factor, but it's better than not having it at all. And that's the thing,
Exactly.
is like in a lot of this, as me as an owner, I go and, man, I'm here and I need to be here when I think of a concept of, hey, we need to get there. But how you get there is a series of just individual steps. You're putting one foot in front of the other. You're not going to make a giant leap from the ground to the top of the mountain. You're going to slowly climb your way up. And that's the key, is just making those small improvements as you go. Another one to look at, depending on your environment, would be starting to set up some what we term micro-segmentation, or just kind of reducing the access that individuals or systems have to other information or other servers or systems or things like that. And then
Yeah, because then it's like a ship, right? You get a hole in the ship, and you start boom, start closing off
you
sections of
close
the
those
ship.
ballast doors or
One,
whatever, right?
one,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
exactly. So that you got a puncture in one part of the hull, you just close it off, and the ship keeps moving. Uh, and then you hit on it earlier. It's analytics and monitoring. It's a continuous process. Uh, for business owners that are kind of got started in the early 2000s, you're typically in the mindset of, I bought a computer, I set up the security product, I installed antivirus, I'm good. And that was true then, but it's not anymore. It's a continuous process. It's not, gone are the days of being able to just do an oil change every 6 months or a year and keep things tuned and humming along and secure. And now it's kind of, you're going into the pit every day, every couple days. We're constantly tuning, watching for things, because just a different world out there, as far as threat actors are concerned. Um, but to kind of sum up today's episode, it's that zero trust takes a trust no one approach by default, and it's verify who it is that is on the other end of that continuously throughout the day, not to an extent that's excessive and overbearing, but just every so often verify that it's still that same person that it was 4 hours ago. um, Zero trust can help you meet regulatory compliance requirements, depending on the type of industry that you're in. It can reduce cybersecurity insurance liability and overhead and kind of premiums there. Uh, and overall, zero trust helps you reduce risk as a business owner. And I don't know a single business owner that comes to me and goes, "I want more risk in my business. I want less sleep in my life." And so zero trust, from a technology standpoint, is one of the keys that we use in reducing risks, to businesses these days. So if you're not working with a provider, give us a call, reach out, shoot an email. Happy to have a conversation. Even if we're not the right fit, we can certainly point you in the right direction or help you have those conversations with your current provider. Joe, is there anything else I missed as in the summary that you want to kind of add and leave our audience with?
Yeah, it's just it's a mindset. I think maybe for young folks, it's just yeah, this is the way that the world is. You got facial recognition and thumbprints and multi-factor and all that. But I mean, for us older folks, it's just you're used to just turning everything on and you're in and you work and like it's a different world, but it doesn't have to be a worse one. It's just different. And so, if anyone needs help understanding the differences, I mean, that's what we're here for. I would love to be able to help.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been a privilege as always, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rob.